Good evening, everyone. I, Pallavi Jha, welcome you all to this, the third day of 5 days faculty development program on beginning research in language and literature. First of all, I would like to welcome our today's guest and speaker. Hello.
Yeah.
We can hear you, Pallavi.
Today's guest and speaker, Dr. D. Yogananda Rao from the Department of English, Jain University. Welcome you, sir.
Thank you,
I
ma'am.
also welcome our one of the speaker, Dr. H.K. Swami, sir, to this session today. I welcome you, sir. A warm welcome to our principal, Professor Raghuvi, sir. I also welcome all the faculty members and participants today. Thank you. Welcome you all. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Good evening. I hope what has gone before, that is yesterday and day before yesterday, has been useful to you. As I mentioned, the design of the workshop of this development, faculty development program, it is basically addresses the concerns, the issues that researchers have very early in their research career, so to say, when they're contemplating research. Now, both the sessions, yesterday's session as well as day for yesterday's session, focused on the first aspect. That means the very first step that you take when you want to do your research. That is, first thing is that you have decided that you will do your research. That's the first thing that happens, and then the second thing that happens, probably it may not be in the same order, it may happen in a different order. The second thing that happens, chronologically speaking, is that you look out for a topic. Now, yesterday and day before yesterday, we were discussing about this stage in your the beginning stage. What we will discuss today is how to write a research proposal. Now, once you have selected a topic, please remember, I'm sure most of you are aware of the kind of practice or rules and regulations that almost all universities have these days. So you write an entrance exam, appear before a panel of a committee, then your research, you are given the provisional admission to either MPhil or PhD research programs, and then you go through what's called as the coursework. There may be 3 courses or 4 courses depending on the university in which you are pursuing your research. Some universities have 3, some universities have 4. That is for PhD. And then 6 months later, 6 to 8 months later, you write your course and exams. Assume that you have cleared this. In the next 4 or 5 months, you will be required to go through what is called as a pre-registration colloquium. Now, it is at this stage, it is for this stage that today's talk is aimed at. When you have to go through the pre-registration colloquium in the course of your PhD, by the time you finish your PhD, you would have given at least 4 or 5 presentations. Colloquium is a very loaded word, but in essence, what it means is a presentation that you give. Simply put, it is a presentation that you give before a doctoral research committee or a committee that might have been formed. So today's, I mean, some of you may have already, the first day itself I mentioned that some of you may have gone through all these stages, but in the course of organizing this FDP and giving some kind of a structure to it, and assuming that this is going to be the first of the 3, at least 2 workshops that we have, or FDP programs that we have, it is this stage that we are addressing. I think I must have told you this the other day. So then, how do you write a research proposal? Now, let me, I have a small presentation. I will share the screen with you. Yeah. Now let's try to understand why we need a research proposal, or the function of a research proposal. Toward the end of yesterday's talk, or rather yesterday's program, there was a question that was asked by one of the participants as to the how we can get into the practice of writing. I have so much to write, and how do I write it? That somehow, I mean, something like that was what was asked. Now, I was also mentioning that everyone does research in her or his life, but why is PhD or MPhil research different? It is, and I think I told you that MPhil and PhD research are what are called as formal engagement with research. One, when it is formal, remember, it will have to adhere to certain conventions. Whereas if I have to buy a car, I do my research. If I have to buy a shirt, I do my research. But I don't have to do it in a very, very formal manner, in a very systematic manner. I don't have to adhere to any conventions there. I do it in my own way. Some of us, of course, are very, very detailed there. We come home, we write on a piece of paper, compare price of one model of car with another model of car, or how much one particular showroom may be selling the car for. All this is research. And we may come home and we may sit down and jot down, trying to arrive at a comparison. Well, in a way, we may do that, but it does not adhere to any kind of a convention. But doing formal research, you will have to adhere to certain conventions, certain practices. And one of the first of that is writing a proposal. Now, assuming that you have done a lot of background reading, now in a manner of saying, the kind of background reading that you do, we called it very, very broadly as background reading. Basically, in research language, it is also called as survey of literature. You see, review of literature is slightly different. Survey of literature is what you do as the first step. You have not yet selected your topic, and you are in the process of exploring the topic, exploring for a topic, looking for a topic, so to say. That is what we mean by survey of literature. So the other day when I was talking to you about finalizing or getting a topic, or looking for a topic, it was this part that I was addressing. Now that you have, now we assume that you have selected a topic, then you have to write a research proposal. What is the problem in writing a research proposal? You see, that is one of the first steps when you become aware, when you become sensitive to the fact that whatever you know, you cannot pour it just like that. You will have to, whatever knowledge you may have, whatever background or information you may have gathered, you may have to convey it in a systematic manner. So what this does is that it helps you to reorganize the ideas, information that you have. And this is what brings discipline to our research. Research, like I said, must conform to certain conventions, and one of them is that it must be very, very disciplined. So all the information that I may have gathered about a particular topic, now I need to put it in a format which is what the proposal will demand. Now, the reason why it is necessary for us to put it in the form of a proposal with certain heads, some certain subheading, some sections. I will take a look. I'll take you through that in the later part of this presentation. The Goal of research proposal is it has two functions. The first one is to present whatever you know. Second and most important is to justify that there is a need to study. There is a need for such a study to be undertaken. Now, this is what you will present before the registration committee. That is, when you make a pre-registration colloquium. Remember, your PhD admission to PhD is provisional. It gets confirmed only after you go through the pre-registration presentation or proposal presentation. So you have to give reasons as to why your proposal, research proposal, must be accepted by the university. So your proposal has this function. First thing is that you tell the people there, you convince the people there, you persuade the people there that you have done enough reading, and based on what you have read, what reading you have done, you have arrived at the conclusion that there is an absolute need for such a research to be conducted, for such a research to be undertaken. Now, that is what a research proposal, that is the value of a research proposal. It helps you to defend your proposal. So therefore, it must provide a very convincing proof that there is a need exists for this proposed study. Now, whatever study you wish to undertake, you will have to argue, like I said a minute ago, you will have to argue that there is a need, and therefore the university or the institution in which you wish to pursue your research has to allow this. Now, the committee there will basically look for how very persuasive and convincing your argument is. That is what they will look for. So if you have written a good proposal, the chances of you making good presentation is are more. So ensure that you write the research proposal in a very, very systematic manner, in a convincing manner. That also tells people that you have spent time in organizing your thoughts. I will take you through the parts of constituents or the components of a research proposal. But the moment you see that, and some of you have already done that, will know that it requires us to organize our ideas, organize our thoughts. And that is where discipline comes in. So good research proposal will also provide a detailed methodology for conducting the research. By that, what we mean is, do you have any plan? Okay, now you have a topic, fine, good. But do you have a plan as to how you will go about doing it? This is what this is what methodology means. Mean the method by which you will undertake your research, complete your research, go forward in your research. There is, of course, a difference between method and methodology. Methodology basically is more related to the theoretical and conceptual framework. Method is the actual practice of doing it. For example, are you going to get your data through a survey, or are you going to get your data through a questionnaire? Are you going to conduct a pilot study? These are all methods. Methodology is the framework. For example, you may in our literary studies, you may use Marxist theories, or you may use post-colonial theories. Now that roughly becomes a theoretical or a conceptual framework. Now your proposal must do these two things. First, give proof or argue that your proposal needs to be, or rather the topic that you propose to undertake to study is worthy of being studied. The second is you have a definite plan as to how you will do it. You see, any topic that you wish to do research in must be located in a framework, in a context, let's put it that way. So roughly methodology, when you start beginning, or rather when you start thinking about, when you begin to think about how you will place it in a context, slowly you will start moving towards, you will arrive at a methodology. So your research proposal, one, it has to justify why your research proposal must be accepted, or your research or study must be accepted. Second, it will give a fairly good idea as to how you wish to go about your doing your research. So there are a couple of questions that your research proposal must address. Now, when you ask yourself this question, before you sit down to write, ask yourself this question, write this down somewhere. Okay, what do I plan to accomplish? What is it that I want to work on? Answer these questions. It will help you to write your proposal. That means if you can answer these questions, it means you're quite clear about what you want to do. And if you're quite clear, the clarity in your thoughts will come only if you have been able to sort out the information that you have. So ask yourself, what is it that I want to do? Now, why do you want to do this research? Why do you think there is a need for this research? In one of the vivas that I was in, PhD viva very recently, the question that was asked to the scholar was this: okay, you've done your research, but why should anyone read it? Right. Well, now you ask yourself, okay, I'm doing this research, but why would anyone want to be reading this? Why would anyone be interested in reading this? What value would this have for someone who reads this? Now, please try to answer this question. That's where you will start getting clarity. Once you can answer that question, why would anyone want to read? So you see something like, so what? Okay, so what? So why should I read your research? I mean, some people can be a little rude and ask you, so what? Okay, you said all these things, but so what? Now, if you come across such questions, be mentally prepared to answer them. It would be possible for you to answer, provided you have a clear idea as to what you want, and the clarity will emerge if you can answer these questions. So now you remember you have already chosen a topic. Then you are sitting down now to write the proposal. Answer these questions. So what will I accomplish? Why do I want to do this? And how am I going to conduct the research? Once you have a good idea about this, now for example, you may have some answer to question 1, question 2. You may not have an answer to question 3. That means you have to spend some more time thinking about your topic. You're not yet ready to write your proposal. If you can answer all these 3 questions convincingly, there is no, I cannot say correctly, answer these questions correctly. There's nothing like correct or wrong here. It is how convincing you are, how clear you are. That is all that matters here. So therefore, basically, if you can answer these questions, then that means you are ready to write your proposal. Look at this now. What do I want to study? Now fine tune your questions. Move from these broad questions. If you can answer these questions, then it wouldn't be difficult for you to answer these questions. So fine tune your questions. Move one step further. What do I want to study? State that. Why is the topic important? Please note this. What do you plan to accomplish? Why do you want to do the research? Why is the topic important? This question you will be able to answer if you have answered these two questions. What do you plan to accomplish, and why do you want to do the research? You will be able to answer this question. Then how is it significant within the subject areas? Why is that research that you propose to conduct? How can that impact your domain, your discipline? You remember, research is addition to the existing body of knowledge. So it will have to augment, or it will have to add to what already exists. So it is an addition that you are making. So how will it impact, or how will it be significant within the discipline? And then what problems will it help solve? I was telling you the other day, for most quantitative research, they will usually formulate research problems. Qualitative research will formulate research questions. So research problems for them and research questions for people who are involved in literary studies. Now you can replace that word problem with questions if you are doing a qualitative research, but doesn't matter anyway. Ask this question: what problems or what questions will it help answer? How does it build upon and hopefully go beyond the research that is already conducted on the topic? This is very important. This is a very, very important thing. How does it build upon and hopefully go beyond the research already conducted in the on the topic? This and this are connected. How is it significant within the subject area, and how will it build on and go beyond the research already conducted on the topic? Then what exactly should I plan to do? Can I get it done in the time available? What time is available? Usually 3 years, 2 years after, 24 months, 2 years after your colloquium, you become eligible to submit your thesis. You become eligible to submit your dissertation or thesis. Will whatever you wish to do, will you be able to do it within these 2 years? Don't be too very ambitious. Limit yourself. Try to understand how much you can do, and choose. You see, choosing a topic also means being able to tell where you will limit yourself, or to what you will limit yourself to, what we call as the scope of your study. You must be able to answer that question too. One researcher is not able to solve, or one researcher is not expected to answer all the questions that might arise in any given area. You can only select some of them and answer those questions. So how much can you do in the time that is available? You must have given a good thought. You must have considered all these things well. It is not getting into research and then thinking about these things or coming to know about these things. Now, if that happens, you will be taking more than what time is usually allotted by the institutions or the universities. In most of the cases, this is what I've seen. One of the reasons for them delaying, of course, there are several reasons. One of the reasons for them delaying is this one, that they have bitten more than they can chew. So please try to understand this, understand your limitations, and be very, very clear about the scope of your research, scope of your study. Simply put, of course, as the next slide will make that very, very clear. Here, these are the heads under which you now can start writing your proposal. Please look at this. You have answered these questions, or let us assume that you have given a good thought to these things. See, by asking these questions, what happens is, like I said, it directs our attention. It helps us to focus one thing at a time. One second, it helps us to organize some information that we may have. Will it pertain to where can it go? Can it go in the under aims? Can it go under the scope of study? Where can it go? You are organizing the information that you have. It helps you to think better. Organized thinking is more effective thinking. And whatever information you have, if you are able to organize it, then that becomes very, very disciplined. That's where discipline comes into your research. We may have a lot of, yesterday, one of the participants asked this question. The problem is, I think with him, I don't know, I think it was Vasant Bhatt who asked that question. I don't know whether he is there today. The problem is, I think if he feels it very, very difficult to start, or very confusing to not being able to decide what can be used and what cannot be used, that will come when your thinking is not organized. Thinking is organized when you are able to put it under these heads. This forms the backbone for your research. This is what this is the research proposal that you will present before the committee for your as a part of your what's called as pre-registration colloquium. But this will also help you to decide whether something is useful, can be included in your thesis when you are writing it, or should it be excluded. So you have to go back to this. If you, at a later stage, when you start writing your thesis, if you start getting these kind of doubts, now can I include this, can I not include this, etc., etc. Now that's what I was trying to tell him yesterday. Go back to the basics, and this is our basics. Spend more time on this. The more time you spend on this, that will give you the right kind of direction. The more time you've spent on this, remember, it is time well spent, because you are laying a very solid foundation. If I have to use the metaphor of the construction of a building or your house, so this can be seen as the foundation. At a later date, whenever you have any kind of a doubt, you can always come back here. Look at this. Well, then let me very briefly explain each of these heads. The first part, how you will begin your proposal, is this. Write an introduction, contextualize your study. What is the context of your study? Is it a post-colonial context? Or is it a feminist context? Is it a Marxist context? What exactly is the context of your study? Where are you locating? In what context are you locating or situating your research? This is what you will write in the introduction. And then spell out your aims. Quite a lot of them usually think that aims and objectives mean the same thing. They are actually not the same thing. As you can see on your screen, aim will answer the question what you want to do. Objectives will answer the question how you plan to do it. Right? You may say that I want to understand these things. I want to study these things. I want to study the impact of X on Y or something like that. That is what you want to study. But how do you want to study it? You must have some plan. Don't think that No, first I will select the topic and then see how I will go about studying it. That doesn't happen. That doesn't happen. If you have a topic, that means you know what you want to study. It also means you know how. You have already found out a means by which you can go ahead and do your study. So that is objectives. And then the most important part of your proposal is your literature review, also called as review of literature. Here, the word literature might be a little misleading, especially for us students of literature, because the moment we talk about literature, we are always thinking about, say, Shakespeare's plays or Dickens' novels or Keats' poems. We always try to, we associate the word literature, the term literature, with imaginative writing or creative writing. But here, the term in review of literature, the term literature means something else. It means you being aware of what work has already been done in your field. This is what, if you have done a good review of literature, of course, I will, because this is very, very important for us at this stage. I will spend a little more time, be a little more detailed in a later slide. But okay, fine. Right now, we are going to write the review of literature. And the review of literature will convince any reader or the panel members that you are aware of the state of art, so to say, in the area in which you wish to do your research. More importantly, you see, any research will be an attempt to enter that river at a particular stage, right? That means, in other words, your research has a historical angle to it. Quite a few of them have done their research in the domain. Now you are entering that stream. So in a way, it is necessary for you to understand the history, because what you will also be doing is contribute or be a part of that history, so to say. And after you finish your research, then of course your research is a part of history. And some other researcher who will come about and want to do who want to do research in the same related domain will then quote your work as a part of his or her review of literature. So you see, that's how we contribute to the study of, that's how our research contributes to the body of existing knowledge. Now, what it also does is, more importantly, this is what the committee will be looking for, the research gap. If you have to convince me that permission must be granted to undertake or embark on research in or on the topic that you have come to present, then one way of convincing me is to say that there are gaps. Yes, there have been quite a lot of research done, yes, but some of it, there are some gaps that have not been yet filled up. Your research, you will argue, in your proposal, you will argue that you will fill up these gaps. But how do you arrive at these gaps? How do you identify these gaps? Only through going through this one, finding out what has already been done. Once you find out what has already been done, then you will also be able to see an opening, in the sense what has not been done. So you will convince, you will sound more convincing if you have identified the gaps successfully and propose that your research will fill up these gaps. This is technically what is called as research gap. Yesterday we were talking about jargon. All these are, of course, much of this is jargon: research gap, literature review, research question. All this is jargon, yes, true. But what it simply means, research gap simply means, is being aware of what has not been done. As I was telling you, If someone has already done it, why do you want to waste time? Your time, your guide's time, the university's time, the society's time. Why do you want to waste duplicating some work? So you have to convince the committee that gaps exist. There are dark areas or problematic areas or gray areas, and your research will fill that gap, throw light, clarify. Then you have already, you see, formulated your aims. Connect this with your research questions or research problems. Your aim, that is what you want to do, and your research questions must be in alignment. Your introduction must be leading to this, your aims and your research questions. It must lead to that. So in a way, what you write, different parts of your research proposal must all be organically connected, linked. So your introduction will contextualize in such a way that it will lead to your aim, what you want to do. And then your identification of the gap will help you formulate your research questions or research problems. For a PhD topic, you can have, I mean, for a PhD study thesis, you can have 3 or 4, even 5 research questions. That means, in other words, what you will do is, whatever you plan to do, break it down into smaller units, right? What you want to do, break it down into smaller units, 3 or 4, and formulate questions, what you want to do. Break it down into its constituent parts and form your research questions. They can be 3 or 4, even 5 research questions. So that means, in other words, what you want to do is assume that it's a very big thing, and that big thing cannot be handled just like that. It needs to be broken into small bits for us to deal with it. So any problem for that matter, you see, it's necessary for us, any problem, whether in our academic life, professional life, or personal life, any problem, it would be possible for us to solve that problem or answer that question effectively when we break down the question or break down the problem, I mean, into smaller bits and start addressing each of them. When we start addressing these smaller pieces, which is easy to manage, then the larger question or the problem will automatically be addressed. So therefore, please notice our aims, break it down into small questions, smaller units, manageable units, have 3 or 4. So your aims will align with your research questions. Then the next thing is your methodology and theoretical framework. This one will align with your objectives. So aims will be directly related to your research questions and problems. Your objectives will be aligned with your methodology and theoretical framework. How do you plan to do it? Whatever you wish to do here, how do you plan to do that? Put that here in your methodology. See, much of our PhD work consists of analysis. We must have certain tools for our analysis. We may be making use of certain modes of analysis that may already have been used by others. There's nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely nothing wrong, because that is already tested. So it is acceptable. But we must have some plan as to how we will go about analyzing the information that or the data that we may have, or the texts that we may have. See, what you want to do, you will in a way theorize it. Because when we come to the next part of our FTP, which will address this stage, that is thesis writing stage. I will talk to you about chapterization, how you can arrive at uh, chapter design. That we will do some other day. But here, so therefore, your methodology and your objectives will have to be in alignment. Then you have your research questions, you have your research problems. Please notice you would have theorized this. That means your argument. You have an argument. Now, this argument needs to be illustrated. Your argument needs to be illustrated. That means, in other words, let us say I'm writing a paragraph, and I'm writing a paragraph on Bangalore. I may begin my first sentence as in this way. Bangalore is the most polluted city in the world. That is some kind of a thesis statement. Bangalore is the most polluted city in the world. Now that needs support. That needs illustrations. That needs evidence. Now the proposed primary texts are the means by which I will illustrate my point. So therefore, the texts that we may choose as primary texts. Again, for such of us who do use the qualitative research approach or design, because there are several other designs, we will not talk about it now. Some other day we will talk about it. So you see the design that I adopt, I mean, broadly, is it what kind of a study is it? It's a qualitative study. If it's a qualitative study, we will have primary texts or primary sources and secondary sources. Primary sources are those sources that we have chosen to analyze in great detail, that which we will use for illustration. Secondary, those supportive ones, right? Secondary material, what we call as a secondary material. Now, such of them who will do their research in language areas, which will largely be quantitative for them, they have what is called as the primary data and the secondary data. Primary data for them is what they themselves will collect. Maybe going into the field, or maybe conducting a survey, or maybe experiments in the lab, or questionnaire or interview. That is for them primary data. Now, Government of India may have published some data. For example, census reports are published by the Government of India or some other reliable reputed institution, which is not data that has been obtained by the researcher. That may be used. If it comes from a reliable source, that can be used in research. That will be for them secondary data. So there is some slight difference between what we call as primary and what they will call as primary. Remember, for them, that is in social sciences, in language studies, ELT, etc. Primary data is the data that they will obtain by the means of adopting different what they call as elicitation techniques. It may be through observation or through interviews, but that basically is data that they obtain by themselves. That is primary data for them. For us, like I said on the first day itself, the data already exists for literature students, literary studies. The data already exists in the form of the novel or the poem or an essay or a narrative or whatever, or a movie. It already exists for us. And then the scope of the study. This is what I was trying to tell you a few minutes ago. One researcher is not expected to answer all questions that may be connected with the topic that might arise in the context of a topic. So select your questions and select them in such a way that they seem to be very significant. So what is it that your study will do and what is it your study will not do? So in a way, you try to circumscribe or understand the limits of your study. See, what you want to do is to know that is very important. And what you will not attempt to do is also very important for you to know. Right? So get to know the scope, try to think about what it won't do. See here, what you want to do, AIMS will study what you want to do. Your scope will study, I mean, rather will reveal details about or give information about what it won't do. You must be aware of what you will do and what you will not do. And that will have to get into your scope and then have what's called as a working bibliography. That means you already have a plan. When you propose, when you put this in the proposal, it means you have a plan as to what you will do next. For literature students, it is identifying secondary texts or texts that might be supportive of your work. So you have already identified in that. That means in the next 6 months, you know what you will do. That is, you will read these things. Because it's not necessary that all that you read will directly contribute to your research. But at this point, you have identified. That means you have a plan. You're saying that by giving this, you are suggesting that you have done some thinking and you know the way forward. Then conclusion. This is of course not more than 1 or 2 paragraphs that will summarize the proposal. Whatever has been put here, summarize it very, very briefly, not more than 1 or 2 paragraphs. Your conclusion should not be, even in your thesis, your conclusion will not occupy a lot of pages. By generally conclusions in PhD or PhD dissertations or MPhil dissertations, usually will take only about 10 to 12 pages or maybe 1 or 2 pages more, but not more than that. So your conclusion here when you write your proposal will not take more than 1 or 2 paragraphs and summarize whatever you have mentioned in the under the different heads. And then works cited. You may have quoted some works. There's a difference between bibliography and works cited. According to the latest suggestions, especially most of us literature students will follow MLA, and even for that matter, APA. Sciences, social sciences will follow APA. ELT will also, as a rule, follow APA. Doesn't matter. See, you only have to, in the last part of your thesis or in the last part of your proposal, you will give the list of books or sources from which you have actually cited. You may have consulted it, but you may not have quoted from it. If you have not quoted from it, don't put it here. It has no place in your research proposal or in your dissertation or in your thesis. Today, you have to have not references, once upon a time that was used, or bibliography. Working bibliography is different. That means you plan to read these books. But works cited, this must, of course, either you follow the MLA or the APA, the institution in which you pursue your research may have prescribed the format. Please get to learn that. It won't take much time. This is freely available. The MLA format is what most literature students will follow all over the world. And APA is what most social sciences students, scholars in social sciences, or ELT or language studies will follow. But of course, there's no reason why people in social sciences should not follow MLA. There's no reason. But of course, that's a convention. And that is left to the institution or to the discretion of your supervisor. Please do consult. But generally for literary studies, it is MLA. So try to learn how these sources have to be quoted. They have to be quoted in a specific manner. That's what I was trying to say. Conventions in research. When you want to buy a car, there is no such thing called MLA or APA, right? You just jot it down. But when it comes to doing formal research, you will have to be conversant. You will have to be familiar with how you cite your sources. This is freely available on the internet. Just type MLA 8th edition or citation styles. You will get to know. That's not very difficult. So in a way, to summarize, these are the most important components of your research proposal. Almost all research proposals must have these components. Well then, the ROL, I promised that I would speak to you a little more about ROL, also called as review of literature. It does 4 things. It's called 4 C's of ROL. Cite so as to keep the primary focus on literature pertinent to your research problem. What is it that you will use as ROL? That which is directly relevant to your study, right? So that is what you will choose as a source for reviewing. Then compare the different arguments, theories, methodologies that may have been used by other studies. And do the authors agree? Are there people who apply similar approaches to analyzing the research problem or answering the research question? Now, when you write your review of literature, it must have answered this. Then contrast the arguments, compare, contrast the themes, methodologies, approaches, the controversies that may have been expressed. Then critique the literature. So when you write a review of literature, it's not just a summary of the study or the article that you are reviewing. You must be able to critique it. That means, in other words, you must be able to identify the arguments that are more persuasive, the arguments that are weak, that are not convincing. Are there problems in the assumptions? Because all studies will be based on some assumption or the other. So are there problems in that study's assumptions, approaches, findings, or the methodology that is used? Is it appropriate? Is it not appropriate? Is it valid? Is it reliable? If the data obtained is not reliable and all your findings are based on that unreliable data, well, then that can be critiqued. Then connect the source to your own area of research and investigation. See, you can draw upon it, meaning, in other words, you can use certain things that may have been suggested by work that you may have reviewed, or depart from it. So that means, in other words, you can use it as something that will support your argument, or you can depart from it, you can disagree with it, or synthesize it, or provide a new perspective to what has already been said in the literature that you have reviewed. That is what you should be doing in the review of literature. And then describing the methodology. So when you start writing on the methodology, remember, specify the research process you will undertake and the way you will interpret the results obtained in relation to the research question or research problem. This is where I said, you see, are you going to use a new historicist approach? Are you going to use, this is for basically literary studies, are you going to use a post-colonial approach? Are you going to use theories from cultural studies? How are you going to analyze? How are you going to interpret? Then please remember that methodology is not just a list of tasks. You are mounting an argument as to why these tasks are best suited to investigate or explore or answer your research questions. Why is it the most suitable way to analyze? Why is it the most effective way, effective tool for the kind of analysis that you have in mind? And then look at this, anticipate and acknowledge any potential barriers. What problems could arise? And then the kind of mistakes that you could make in your research design. And then how do you plan to address them? All these must have been done. That means quite a bit of thinking must have already gone into this. And finally, you see the title. Your research proposal must also have a proposed title. Don't make the title too very long. Maybe 2.5 lines, even 3 lines is okay for a research. I mean, for a PhD study. 3 lines are also okay these days. Of course, you get 3 lines, but don't make it more than 3 lines. Maximum 3 lines. It should answer basically what and how. Meaning, in other words, it must give. Anyone who reads it must be able to have a clear idea about the nature of the study and what it is studied. What is it that your study has engaged with? One example, you see, journey as a metaphor. A post-colonial study of 21st century travel narratives by selected Indian writers. You see, journey as a metaphor. This is what you want to do here. And how? And you're saying that the nature of the study is a post-colonial study. And what is studied again? 20th century travel narratives by not all Indian writers, but selected Indian writers. Like I said, you see, you cannot, there may be hundreds of writers, travel narratives or travelogues that may have been written by Indians in the 21st century. Already 20 years have gone by. So there may have been hundreds of them. Will you be studying all of them? No, you'll only be studying selected ones. Because why have you selected only these and not others? You will give a rationale for that. You will give an explanation for that. Why these writers and not other writers? You will have to give a rationale for that, but then you don't have to study, you don't have to include all writers, all the 80, 90, 100 travelogues or travel narratives that may have been written in the 21st century by Indian writers. Or if you have chosen any one particular Indian writer, you can mention that here. So please notice this is an example of a workable working title. I mean, workable in the sense, because you can have, some people have one working title and then they fine tune the working title. Anyway, some universities allow that. But what happens is once you make a research, you present your research proposal, your title gets registered. And universities usually allow request to change the title only once, not more than that. You cannot keep changing your title very, very often. Because if you change your title very often, that means you're changing your topic. If you change your topic, then the coursework that you may have done will become invalid. So universities will allow minor changes, fine-tuning of the titles, but they will not allow major changes in the title, because if the title changes entirely and if it's a major change, then that means the topic itself is changed. So if the topic has changed, then that means, remember, the permission was given for one particular topic, because you argued that it was justified. I mean, studying that topic, researching on that topic was justified. And on the basis of that, they have given you the permission to register, or they have allowed you to register. Now, if you change the topic, then again you will have to go through that pre-registration colloquium, technically speaking. So that will happen only if you have not given enough thought at the proposal writing stage. That can happen, that may happen later, but that will happen. That there's a danger of that happening, no doubt about it. But that can happen only if you have not done this part well. If there has been inadequacy in this part, that means you may have proceeded further, you will have to keep coming back. So this is just an example. I'm not saying that this is a perfect title. Something like this. You see, it answers what, and it also answers how. What is the nature of the study? Once upon a time, we came across titles like this: William Shakespeare, A Critical Evaluation, or Charles Dickens, the novels of Charles Dickens, An Appreciation. Now, those are very, very vague. Those kind of titles will not be accepted these days. Your title has to be a little more fine-tuned and precise. It has to give this information, the nature of the study. You can have, say, historicist. Okay, fine, do that. A structural analysis or a stylistic analysis. Okay, fine, no problem with that. But it should mention the nature of the study. This is a post-colonial study, as you can see, and that is being very clearly brought out by the title. Now, if there are any questions, I will try to answer those questions. If you have any doubts.
I request participants to raise your hands to ask questions. Yeah.
No questions?
I'm checking, sir.
Sir, Yoganand sir,
Yes, sir.
regarding that compare and contrast, usually we see we'll be making a lot of mistakes there. How do we, can you be little bit elaborate on that?
Simple, sir. Let us say there are, in the course of doing your review of literature, you come across two studies which may have, which may be relevant or related to the area of your topic or the area of your study. Now, these two may have used contrasting theories or tools for analysis. Right. So when you write the review of literature, you will pit one against the other because of their approaches or because of the methodology that they may have employed. One may have used one methodology, other may have used another methodology, but both of them may have to, may be related to the area of your study. So that is what I meant by compare and contrast. You may be selecting one of them, or you may use one as a model for your study. There's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong. But then when there are 2 or 3 studies on the same topic, you will evaluate them. That means critically evaluate them. By evaluate, I don't mean, okay, this is good, this is not good, or not that kind of evaluation, a critical evaluation. I said compare and contrast.
For example, I found some interesting studies on the net. Death in Shakespeare, net internet. Even on Shodh Ganga, I browsed through the PhD thesis. Death in Shakespeare Place 1, and then Suicide in Shakespeare Place. So, suppose keeping these two in the mind, how do we compare and contrast?
No, that is your topic.
Okay.
I was talking about review of literature.
No, yeah. Even in review of
No,
literature.
no, in review of literature, you will take only those studies that already have been conducted on one of your topic. Let us assume that your topic is suicide in Shakespeare. So now what you will do in review of literature is take a look at all studies that may have
All right.
been done. So here, one of them that is relevant for you, if you decide it so, if your supervisor says yes, yeah, that's relevant, you may include death, some work that's done on death in Shakespeare, and contrast. That's very easy. So the suicide is only one form of death.
Yeah, agree. Thank you.
So then that becomes a little more specific. Death in a thesis or rather in a study like say death in Shakespeare, it can include murder, it can include natural death, it can include suicide. But if there is a study which says suicide in Shakespeare, then it is narrowing it.
Yeah, it's more focused.
So you can say this, right? You can say, see, now you got how it has to be compared.
Exactly.
Raghu,
ಹೇಳಿ ಸ್ವಾಮಿ.
ಇವಾಗ if you want to work on suicide, especially in the place of Shakespeare, and if you want that to be your research topic, there's something called researchability, meaning scope of your research, meaning how many cases of suicide can you find in Shakespearean plays?
Immediately I can remember Ophelia and Calpurnia.
So you have 37 plays, and in case you find more references of suicides in Shakespearean plays, then that might become researchable. If you have only 1 or 2 cases, then researchability will become too narrowed down, and you will not be able to defend your argument pretty sufficiently. It's like you find a road close to your house where you have seen 1 or 2 accidents happening. You can't simply report it to the corporation asking for some house unless you have that phenomenon becoming repeatedly occurring before you. You cannot consider that to be a bloodied road. So you can't come to such conclusion with one. So if you want to work on suicide, just check if you have more cases of suicides in Shakespeare, and if you can look at it in diversified ways, like how you can find Anna Karenina's suicide. So it's a suicide that is actually caused by the society. Anna basically was a happy woman, but unfortunately her happiness was curbed by morality-ridden society. So it's a different kind of a suicide. And if you have another kind of suicide in Shakespeare, then that will become worth comparing and contrasting. So just think for more cases so that you can work.
No, on the topic of suicides in Shakespeare, Ophelia is one, yes, and then Lady Macbeth is another. These two come immediately to the mind. And in Shakespeare, suicide is seen as failure. In these 2 cases, it is possible for us to say that it's a clear admission of failure. ಈಗ Anna Karenina suicide ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇದೆಯಲ್ಲ, ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಆ ಸ್ಟಿಮ್ಯುಲಸ್ ಇದೆಯಲ್ಲ, ಅದು ಬೇರೆ.
ಹೌದು
ಅಲ್ವಾ? ಅದು ಸೊಸೈಟಿಯಿಂದ ಇಂಡ್ಯೂಸ್ ಆಗುವಂತ ಒಂದು ಪ್ರೆಷರ್. ಅದು
it's induced from outside, as you say. This is internal.
It's an admission.
Ophelia case only internal.
So Ophelia is not able to see in both the cases. They are not able to, both women ಒಂದು.
Exactly.
ಅದನ್ನ ನೋಡಿ ಈ ತರ ಪ್ರೊಸೀಡ್ ಮಾಡಬಹುದು ನಿಮ್ಮ ಸ್ಟಡಿ. You can proceed
just keep it as an example, sir.
ಈಗ both of them are women, and both these are occurring in tragedies, right? And in Shakespeare, we know very well, in tragedies men dominate. ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಅದರ ಟೈಟಲ್ ನೋಡಿ, ಹ್ಯಾಮ್ಲೆಟ್ ಎಲ್ಲ ಮೇಲ್ ಪ್ರೊಟಗನಿಸ್ಟ್. ಸೊ ಅದಿದ್ದೇ ಇದೆ ಇದರಲ್ಲಿ. ಮತ್ತೆ ಎರಡನೇದು, ಯು ಸಿ both of them commit suicide out of guilt. Ophelia commits suicide because she has spied on Hamlet. Lady Macbeth commits suicide because she realizes what she has goaded her husband into doing. Alva, out, brief candle. Life is but a walking shadow. ಇದೆಲ್ಲ ಇದೆಯಲ್ಲ anyway, I don't want to go into start teaching Shakespeare.
Gurugule, Yoga, it was quite interesting that you pointed out about patriarchy in literature. Just look at how the periods of literature have been classified. Age of Shakespeare, age of Milton. At least Victorian era dalli ಅಷ್ಟು ಜನ ಹೆಣ್ಮಕ್ಳು ಬರೆದ್ರು, ಅದನ್ನ ಬರೀ ವಿಕ್ಟೋರಿಯನ್ ಎರಾ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರು, ಅಲ್ಲೊಂದೇ ಒಂಚೂರು ವಿಕ್ಟೋರಿಯಾ ಬರ್ತಾಳೆ, ಈ ಕಡೆ ಎಲಿಜಬೆಥನ್ ಎರಾ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ಬೋದು. ಬಟ್ ಇಟ್ಸ್ ಮೋರ್ ಆಫ್ ಪೇಟ್ರಿಯಾರ್ಕಿ.
ಅದು ವಿಕ್ಟೋರಿಯನ್ ಇರಾನು ಕ್ಲಾಸಿಫಿಕೇಶನ್ ಅಲ್ಲೂ ನೀನ್ ಕನ್ಸಿಸ್ಟೆಂಟ್ ಆಗಿರಬೇಕು. ಉದಾಹರಣೆಗೆ ನೋಡು, ಫಾರ್ ಎಕ್ಸಾಂಪಲ್ ಕೆಲವು ಕಡೆ ನೀನು ಶೇಕ್ಸ್ಪಿಯರಿಯನ್ ಏಜ್ ಅಂತ ಕರೀತೀಯಾ, ಕೆಲವು ಕಡೆ ರೊಮ್ಯಾಂಟಿಕ್ ಏಜ್ ಅಂತ ಕರೀತೀಯಾ. ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಹಿಸ್ಟಾರಿಕಲ್ ಕನ್ಸಿಡರೇಷನ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ, ಮೂವ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಕನ್ಸಿಡರೇಷನ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ, ಹಿಸ್ಟಾರಿಕಲ್ ಕನ್ಸಿಡರೇಷನ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಎಲಿಜಬೆಥನ್ ಏಜ್ ಅಂತ ಕರೆದ್ರೆ ನೀನು ಕನ್ಸಿಸ್ಟೆಂಟ್ ಆಗಿರ್ಬೇಕು. ಸೊ ಎಲಿಜಬೆಥನ್ ಏಜ್ ಅಂತ ನೋಡಿ, ಇದು ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಹಿಸ್ಟ್ರಿ ಆಫ್ ಇಂಗ್ಲಿಷ್ ಲಿಟರೇಚರ್ ಓದೋ ನಮ್ಮ ಮಕ್ಕಳಿಗೆ ಅರ್ಥನೇ ಆಗಲ್ಲ. ಇದು ನೇಷಗಳಿಗೂ ಅರ್ಥ ಆಗಲ್ಲ. ಇದು ನಾವು ಕ್ಲಾಸಿಫಿಕೇಶನ್ ಕೊಡ್ತೀವಲ್ಲ ಹಿಸ್ಟ್ರಿ ಆಫ್ ಇಂಗ್ಲಿಷ್ ಲಿಟರೇಚರ್ ಅಂತ ಕೊಟ್ಟಾಗ ಕನ್ಸಿಸ್ಟೆಂಟ್ ಆಗಿರ್ಬೇಕು. ಐದರ್ ಗೋ ಬೈ ದ ಮೋಸ್ಟ್ ಡಾಮಿನೆಂಟ್ ರೈಟರ್ ಆಫ್ ದಟ್ ಪೀರಿಯಡ್, ಏಜ್ ಆಫ್ ಶೇಕ್ಸ್ಪಿಯರ್, ಏಜ್ ಆಫ್ ವರ್ಡ್ಸ್ವರ್ತ್, ರೈಟ್, ಏಜ್ ಆಫ್ ಟೆನಿಸನ್, ಏಜ್ ಆಫ್ ಎಲಿಯಟ್, ಈ ತರ ಕೊಡ್ಬೇಕು. ಇಲ್ಲ ಹಿಸ್ಟಾರಿಕಲ್ ಆಗಿ ತಗೋ, ಎಲಿಜಬೆಥನ್,
ಪರ್ಫೆಕ್ಟ್,
ಅಗಸ್ಟನ್, ವಿಕ್ಟೋರಿಯನ್, ಈ ತರ ತಗೋಬೇಕು. ಅಥವಾ ಮೂವ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಇಂದ ತಗೋಬಹುದು, ರೆನೆಸಾನ್ಸ್ ಲಿಟರೇಚರ್, ಕ್ಲಾಸಿಕಲ್ ಲಿಟರೇಚರ್, ನ್ಯೂ ಕ್ಲಾಸಿಸಿಸಮ್, ರೊಮ್ಯಾಂಟಿಕ್ ಏಜ್, ನ್ಯೂ ಮಾಡರ್ನಿಸ್ಟ್, ಈ ತರ ತಗೋಬಹುದು.
ಕರೆಕ್ಟ್.
ಆದ್ರೆ ತುಂಬಾ ಇಂಪಾರ್ಟೆಂಟ್ ಏನು ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ we have to be consistent at ಅನ್ನೋದಷ್ಟೇ.
Okay.
We don't
any participants?
We shouldn't mix it up.
Participants questions idra nodi Raghu.
Yeah.
ನಾವೇ
discussion. See, just I wanted to warm up, open up.
Sir, chat box ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಒಬ್ರು ಟೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ ಕಳಿಸಿದ್ದಾರೆ, ಅಶ್ವಿನಿ ಮ್ಯಾಮ್ ಅವರು.
Okay.
For dissertation, should we concentrate only after we finish second half year?
ಇಲ್ಲ, ನೀವು actually you see, not second year. What I meant was you become eligible to submit your thesis 2 years after you have presented your proposal, and your proposal or your pre-registration colloquium is over. From that date you have 2 years. You become eligible to submit after 2 years. So you don't have to start writing after 2 years. You become actually eligible to submit your thesis or your dissertation after 2 years. So you should start writing. I mean, I'm not saying start writing. Start thinking about writing your thesis soon after you finish your colloquium. I mean, your pre-registration colloquium, which you will not be able to do. But your thinking must be aligned to that. Ashte. You will not be immediately able to start writing after your pre-registration colloquium is over. No, you will not be able to write. But you should have started thinking about it. You don't have to wait for 2 years after. 2 years after you become eligible for submission.
Okay.
I think I have answered her question. I don't know. Is that what her question was, ma'am?
Yeah, sir. Actually, I am unmuting Ashwini ma'am, but they are not able to unmute it.
Okay.
One more participants have chatted. I will unmute them, so we can ask them directly.
Sure.
Hello, Purnima ma'am.
Ask her to unmute.
Yeah, yes, sir. I'm asking Purnima ma'am. Could you please unmute? Sir, what was the text, Purnima ma'am? Yeah, Purnima ma'am.
Hello.
Yeah, yes, ma'am. Go ahead, ma'am. Your voice is audible.
Hello. Yoganand
we can
sir
hear
and
you.
Swami sir, good evening.
Yeah, I can hear you. Please
Yeah,
go ahead.
I have an observation to make. Like even Puritanism also had a role to play in the death and the murder and the hanging cases, since people would be punished very severely, even for the minor offences also. So what I have read about Shakespeare's plays is that Shakespeare would try to please even the rustic people or the vulgar people who would come to see his performances in those days. It's just an observation.
Yeah. Which is the reason why, if you've read Terry Eagleton, who is a Marxist critic, if you've read Terry Eagleton has a short poem in which he calls Shakespeare is a traitor.
Mm.
Right. Now, obviously, it aligns with what you are saying. Shakespeare was anti common people.
So
I
he
mean,
played to the galleries. That's what they say.
no, I mean, this is a Marxist view. You can accept it or you can leave it.
Yes, sir.
Right. But Terry Eagleton, being a Marxist critic,
Yeah.
does not seem to have too much respect for Shakespeare. Of course, as a writer, yes, but as Marxist critics always look for where your sympathies lie.
Okay.
Basically, Marxist criticism, as you know, will try to engage with this question as to whether your text, if you've written a novel, whether that is endorsing or critiquing the hegemony of the period.
Okay.
Right? Is it questioning or is it uh, uh, supporting, endorsing? So is it a part of the superstructure or is it critiquing?
Okay.
See, we talk about B grade, C grade, D grade love stories, right? Any number of love stories that we get to see. But I think even a B grade, C grade love story has some value. Because you see, what is happening basically is, in most love stories, of course, this is a cliche. In most love stories, either the boy is rich or the girl is rich. The boy is poor or the girl is poor. One of the two. But please notice, it has a value. I mean, for us, because we've seen too many of that, and we don't go too very. We don't spend more time than 2 or 3 minutes because we want novelty. Everything has to be new for us.
Yes.
We seem to suffer from that kind of a problem. But please notice, when the boy is rich and the girl is poor, or vice versa, please notice that they are talking about a class clash. The class can be located in the class war, class struggle kind of a context. And you can see that the youngsters are for a classless society.
Yes.
That is why they fall in love with each other. Their falling in love with each other can be interpreted as an attempt to abolish the class, which is what Marxism has been talking about. Right. So it depends on how you analyze, how you would like to look.
Okay. Okay. Sir. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Anybody would like to raise a question?
Sir, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Sir, what is the basic difference between the case study research and the qualitative research? Mostly I'll see the English literature person, they will do in case study research. And social science people will do in the quality research. Why, sir?
No. I think you got it slightly mixed up, ma'am. Literary studies usually are qualitative studies, because much of what we do, as I was telling you, much of what literature students will do is subject the text that they have chosen to very, very close scrutiny, what is called as textual analysis, close reading, textual analysis. Now, case study method, you see, that is one way of obtaining your data through case studies, cases. That is the one that Sigmund Freud followed, right? Most of his formulations came on the basis of the cases that he had dealt with. So usually in social sciences, you have the case study method. In literary studies, you have the qualitative method. Now, of course, there can be a combination. There can be a combination, but usually literary studies will usually be qualitative studies.
But is there any difference through technical aspect between these two?
No, the mode of analysis, you have to have some tool for analysis. That can remain the same.
Okay.
For example, you see, in a very broad manner, why is it difficult for me to consider 3-4 minutes ago we were talking about Ophelia, we were talking about Macbeth. Are they not cases?
Yes.
So in a way it would qualify as case study too. But generally the term case studies is used by social sciences, people in social sciences, people in management studies. They take a case that has already happened. But here in the case of Ophelia, in the case of Lady Macbeth, it is imaginative. What case studies will do is take those cases that have actually happened. Right? Here, these are, though there may be cases, Freud did that, right? When he took characters from literature, when he studied Electra, when he studied Oedipus, he was taking these as cases. He did that.
And one more thing I want to add here is for the convenience of students is when we have this word qualitative analysis, it should not be mixed up with the word quality. And when we are talking about quantitative, here you just understand that we deal with numbers, quantity. And qualitative is not in any way related to the word quality. You don't have to think that you are doing qualitative analysis, qualitative research because you want to have quality in it. It's not that way.
Yeah.
And qualitative work deals more with theorization, and quantitative work deals more with numbers. Simple example, literacy rate in Tumkur. You can deal with this in both the ways. If I want to talk about literacy rate in Tumkur, I can simply not give you the accountability in terms of how many people are literates here in Tumkur. Instead, I can just give you some kind of an explanation about it. But when you want to do quantitative analysis of Tumkur, I need to give you proper statistics. At this particular age, people normally go to school, and from some particular age, there is a lot of dropout rate. So here I'm dealing with numbers. So quantity deals with numbers, quality deals with theory.
Basically, it has to do with the nature of your data.
Yeah.
When your data is largely numerical, then generally it will tend towards being a quantitative study.
Perfect.
But according to you, you suggest to go for which one, case study or the quantitative or qualitative study?
Nimdu yavadu discipline yavadu nimdu?
No,
social science.
Social sciences,
yeah.
Our case studies.
Because recently I attended one presentation in seminar. I saw one English lady. She presented paper in case study. It was very fantastic. I impressed. So I'm planning to go for one case study research.
See, the problem, ma'am, with English people is this. Sometimes they talk about language. Sometimes they're talking about ELT. Sometimes they're talking about literary texts.
Psychoanalytical study.
And one very important thing is because you belong to social sciences, your contribution to the society, in fact, will be largely important as compared to what we actually do as part of humanities. And when you do any work as social scientist, it's important that you do some bit of case study. For example, you want to talk about maybe corona impact. And there's already this assumption that only old people are dying and the kids are dying. how far is that true? And if you really want to investigate into this, medical people will do some kind of a research, and as a social researcher, you also can do some kind of a work. You can just think about the number of deaths that have happened, taking age as a variable.
Correct.
So yeah, you can definitely do case studies. So that will do a lot of justice to your work.
Thank you, sir.
But I have a problem with Professor Swami. When he says social sciences people will directly help solve the world's problems, and literature students are talking about things in thin air out of their hat. I have a very fundamental problem with that. You see, what is happening is they are formulating their study. It seems to be that way because they are formulating their study in this design, that is problem solution design. We are asking questions, that means we are problematizing, that means we are making them aware of the nature of the problem.
ಈಗ ಬದಲಾಗಿದೆ ನಿಜ.
So hangagi nanu become very difficult for me to say that literature students account for nothing in this world, and they are talking about things in a very unpragmatic manner.
I was not being dismissive of research in humanities. I want to slightly emphasize what her contribution as a social scientist should be towards the society. Ashta.
Any more questions?
Anybody? No, sir, I could not find anyone.
Okay, then we can go for a formal closing, and again we'll meet tomorrow.
Yeah.
For Swami sir's continuation of what he spoke yesterday.
Sure.
It's a small request to the organizers.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
Yeah. A small request. Will you please share the main points of all lectures to the participants after the workshop?
Archana ma'am, will you respond?
Yes, sir.
As a technical team head.
Yes, sir. Sir, you are talking about the material, right, sir?
Yeah. No.
Not the material. Not the material.
The main points of everyday's class or webinar.
Okay.
Will you please circulate the same among the participants after the webinar series?
In which way you are expecting, sir? The points.
For example, today's
ಅದನ್ನ ಶೇರ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀರಾ ಅಂತ ಕೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ.
ಇವತ್ತಿನ ಲೆಕ್ಚರ್ ಏನಾಯ್ತಲ್ವಾ, ಅದರ ಮೇನ್ ಪಾಯಿಂಟ್ಸ್ ಅದೊಂದು ಈಗಿನ ಇಲ್ಲೊಂದು ನೋಟ್ ಇದೆಯಲ್ಲ, ಒಂದು ಇವತ್ತು ಕಳ್ಸಿದ್ರಲ್ಲ ನೀವು, ನೋಟ್ ಕಾಣ್ತಾ ಇದೆಯಲ್ಲ, ಅದೇ ತರ ಏನೇನ್ ಡಿಸ್ಕಷನ್, ಏನೇನ್ ಆ ಟಾಪಿಕ್, ಯಾವ ಟಾಪಿಕ್, ಅದ್ರಲ್ಲಿ ಯಾವ್ಯಾವ ಪಾಯಿಂಟ್ಸ್, ಮೇನ್ ಪಾಯಿಂಟ್ಸ್ ಡಿಸ್ಕಷನ್ ಆದ.
ಓಕೆ ಸರ್,
ಪ್ಲೀಸ್.
ಅದು ಮಾಡೋದು ಈಸಿ ಆಗತ್ತೆ ಯಾವಾಗ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ, ಇಫ್ ದೇರ್ ಇಸ್ ಸಮ್ವನ್ ಹೂ ಇಸ್ ಮೇಕಿಂಗ್ ಅ ರಿಪೋರ್ಟ್, ಇಫ್ ಸಮ್ವನ್ ವಾಸ್ ಮೇಕಿಂಗ್ ಅ ರಿಪೋರ್ಟ್, ದಟ್ ವುಡ್ ಬಿ ವೆರಿ ಈಸಿ.
ಯಾರು ಸ್ಟೂಡೆಂಟ್ ಅದನ್ನ ಚಾರ್ಜ್ ಕೊಟ್ಬಿಡಿ ಅಷ್ಟೇ.
ಈಗ 3 ದಿವಸ ಆಗೋಯ್ತಲ್ಲ,
3 ದಿವಸ ಆಗೋಯ್ತು. ಅಂಡ್ ಒನ್ ಮೋರ್ ಅಶ್ಯೂರೆನ್ಸ್ ಐ ವಾಂಟ್ ಟು ಗಿವ್ ವಸಂತ್ ಭಟ್ ಸರ್, we are recording all sessions.
Okay.
And one more thing, when I make notes, I have to get it corrected by DYR sir, because ನಾವೇನೋ ಒಂದ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಅದನ್ನ ಹಾಕಕ್ಕಾಗಲ್ಲ. He has to approve that notes.
Okay.
ಅಲ್ವಾ? So technically ಇದು ಈ ಸಮಸ್ಯೆ ಬರಬಾರ್ದು ಅಂತ ನಾವೇನ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಿದೀವಿ, we are recording all sessions.
Okay, that's fine. Fantastic.
I will tell you, you will not miss a single word. It will be available on our official website as well as
YouTube channel.
Yeah, we'll send you the link.
Thank you very much. Please share those links after the webinar.
Yeah, sure, 100%.
Yeah. Thank you very much, sir.
Nothing can be better than that. I mean, any given report will include only some and leave out something. But recording, that will be very accurate, I think.
Yeah, we have made sure, sir. Our technical team is strong in that area. Archana is leading us.
Zoom alle you have that provision to record it.
And yes, sir. We are recording actually, so the same can be shared with them.
Are you recording it locally or on the
local, sir? In my computer, I'm recording it, sir. Then we will share all the day videos in our college YouTube channel, sir. We'll share the YouTube channel link also. You can directly view that all days FDP programs and concepts discussed in that.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Can we just do the formal ending, sir?
Yeah, please go on.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir, Dr. Yogananda Rao, sir, for the wonderful session and taking the question so very well. We really are fortunate to have you here, and we look forward for the next session, which will be done by you. I also thank Dr. H.K. Swami, sir, for his presence today and his valuable inputs that he gave to us during the question answer session. Thank you so much, sir. We'll be again getting a chance to listen to you tomorrow. I also thank our principal, Professor Raghuvi, sir, and Archana ma'am for the technical support.
Thank you.
My last thanks to all the participants and all the faculty members.